Welcome to the Healing My Parts podcast, a podcast dedicated to educating and raising awareness about dissociative identity disorder, also known as DID. We are your hosts, the system behind Healing My Parts, which also includes parts that function as a therapist and leader in a mental health niche space. We'll be sharing tips and tools that have helped us and many others, while also sharing insights from our own journey of living with the condition. We'll also be hosting guests for conversations to help educate, dispel myths, and most especially help those living with dissociative identities and professionals who treat the condition. Thank you so much for tuning in. And now, let's get healing. Welcome, everybody. We are super excited to welcome the Gianu System back to the show today. We had so much fun last year when we were recording an episode for all of you with the Gianu System and their hubs. It was such a great episode. So if you missed it, please go back and listen to that because there's really rich information in there, especially about relationships. But we're going to have a different conversation today that I'm really excited about. And before we dive into that conversation, I am going to welcome the Gianu System and toss the mic over to them to let you know what they most want you to know.
Hi, and thank you. We had a lovely time last time, and we're very excited to be invited back. We found out that we had DID about 8 years ago. Have been in therapy since. We've started it like 3 times a week because we were very dysregulated. We didn't even know. We're high functioning, air quotes. And
So relatable.
so, right. So we've really dove into like treatment, into discovering who we all were, how to work together, and how best to be healthy. And so um, we experienced a fusion of all our parts this past year. And I had someone be like, "Why do you still use we?" And I was like, actually, it's even more, it feels even more we now because individual alters would use I, but now it's like it's a unit of many. So like a symphony, the individual pianist might be like, yes, I play the piano, the drummer, I might play the drums, but now it's like, well, we play the symphony. So
I love that. That's such a good analogy. And I feel like that may have given a lot of people some comfort because I do feel like many of them have learned to fear the concept of fusion. And
mhm,
I think like we're all for what works for you is the most important thing. But
mhm.
hearing that it doesn't mean that parts just disappear and that it still feels like the collective is there and you're able to access all of that information and all of those aspects. Love
Yeah.
that.
That was one thing we noticed in the community a lot that there are often camps. It's either functional multiplicity or fusion rather than like whatever is healthy for you and your system. But then a lot of people don't talk about what it looks like for them after fusion. A lot of them drop off the radar on their socials, and so then systems are like, "But wait, what does it look like over in that country?" So we've really tried to let them know that like it's very much a fullness. It wasn't a loss. It wasn't anybody disappeared. It was the opposite of anybody disappearing.
I know this was not exactly what we planned on talking about, but it begs the question, right? In your experience now, do you feel like your life is more fluid where you're all sort of collectively moving through the day together?
Yes, actually, that's a really good description of where instead of having hard switches with maybe some disorientation, when we're going into a different situation and another alter gets brought forward, now it's a much more fluid experience, but we still very much see each other's traits and mannerisms in that fluidity.
I know people are going to also want to know, can Jonathan tell those different mannerisms that come up from the different parts, even though you've fused?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, he'll be like, it's giving very Lil right now.
I love it.
Mhm.
I love it. I do hope that that brings some comfort to people who I know are afraid of the concept. And maybe we can begin to bridge some of those gaps between those two camps because I agree, that's what I see too. And it's most important for whatever works for the individual system. that seems weird to say, but I mean, yeah, individual and
Right.
system, but you know what I mean.
Right. Well, and I think that fear is actually coming from a healthy place because when we um, develop DID, it's the separation, it's the break, it's the walls between, and they're like, wait, now that I've gained these people back, I don't want to lose them. And I think that's a healthy reaction. So if you think fusion is lost, you're like, no, like it was bad before when I did not have awareness and connection to all of my team, like all of my people, and I don't want that to be what it's like again. So I think that's coming from a good place.
It's interesting because when you were talking about it, and then there's Jess from Multiplicity and Me, who had that YouTube channel that was really popular for a long time. Before I heard the two of you talking about your experience of fusion, and I think they only did one video on it,
Mhm.
but prior to that, the conceptualization always seemed to be that this is something that you choose and you work towards, and that's what you get. So, like, you either choose functional multiplicity and you work towards that and you get that, or you choose fusion and you work towards that. And what was really eye-opening was hearing both of your experiences of this is something that organically happened. And
Yeah.
it made me take a step back as a part of my own system to realize that, yes, the system is always working to what is best for us to survive in the world as best we can so that we can survive
Yes.
and not just survive, I guess, but thrive is where I was going with that. And, the system is collectively going to figure that out. And no one part, like me in my part right now, has full power to determine that.
Yes. And we really had that sense in the early days. Like there was this very much a felt sense of like watching and seeing if this worked out to be better for the whole. Like it was quite the feeling of like I know where the cracks in this are, and it can come apart if it needs to come apart. Um, I very much agree. And so when people are like, well, functional multiplicity, they're not going for health. I'm like, no way. There are some systems I don't think who will ever find fusion a healthy outcome for them. And so that's another thing I've really tried to, as this has been very good for me, to emphasize that that doesn't mean this is going to be very good for all systems.
And it sounds like really trusting the wisdom of each unique system is really what we
Hmm.
all need to be doing, whether we are the people with the lived experience or the clinicians or those of us who straddle both worlds.
Yes.
I really love that conceptualization of it. It feels so much less scary when you're learning to trust your system to do what's best.
Hmm.
And realistically, it's kept us all alive through, right? So,
Right? We are here today because of the wisdom of the system.
yes, which is a wonderful and beautiful thing.
Yes.
So speaking of how these things come to be, as whether we're
Mhm.
working towards, doesn't matter, whatever happens is going to happen for us.
Yes.
Let's pivot into the modalities of like therapy and healing. And I'm curious if you would be able to share, we're just going to dive into the whole breadth of them, the
Yes.
modalities that you as a system have experimented with, have used,
Mhm.
your thoughts and feelings about some of them, your favorite ones, the ones that really were not great for you, even if they're the most popular thing on the planet. I think so
Yeah.
many people, both clinicians and people with lived experience, are so interested in those details.
Absolutely. So we started off with CBT. It's the baseline. We don't know what's wrong with us. The therapist, why have you come to see me today? So we start with that, and that was never very effective for us, which I don't think it's going to be for people who have trauma, like
Agreed.
period. Especially if the brain is hiding things from you. You're not going to be able to talk out what your brain is hiding from you.
Yes. Including parts.
Yes. Yeah, we were totally unaware of parts for about the first year. Our first year focused on safety and stability, on being able to tolerate being present in our body with our emotions, which I think is a really good baseline. So I appreciate that. Like just the can you be present and be okay? It took us about a year to get that down. In that time, they did some IFS work, which I think is probably going to be mixed with systems because, yeah, you can really lean into IFS work and it can be something where the clinician doesn't realize there are more distinguished parts than the
Yeah.
typical like internal family systems versus parts that can become external and take over
Yes.
systems.
And I'm finding, watching other clinicians work that they struggle to really conceptualize the difference between a DID system and a regular person. So I keep using the analogy of people who don't have a system, like not OSDD or DID, that they could conceptualize all of their parts sitting at a dining room or an executive table. You can see all the parts, you can communicate with them pretty organically, pretty easily, versus potentially having a hallway full of rooms. And with DID, all of those rooms, the doors are shut. With OSDD, I think those doors are sometimes open or cracked open, but
Mhm.
it doesn't mean you necessarily know who's in there or a lot about them. And that's a really different way of working. So that also means for, I think, DID and OSDD, our parts can have some of the parts of the IFS framework.
Yes.
And many of us don't have a self with a capital S, right? We have different parts that may.
Yes. Yeah, I that's one of the things that I've pushed back on. I've had some systems who started with IFS work very strong, and they're like, I'm looking for the self, the core, and I'm like, maybe you are all self and all core in different facets, and it's really hard to take them out of that mindset of, well, who's the real me? Well, I mean, I'm sorry, none of you is, all of you is like, yeah.
So when you all were going through the like sort of dabbling in the IFS, when you think back to that, do you remember the biggest stumbling blocks for you where you're like, this is just not connecting?
It was helpful in understanding that there could be parts of self. So that was a nice, for when I needed to transition into more distinct parts of self, that was a nice understanding. But like they were asking about me as a child, and I didn't have reference for me as a child. I didn't have access to that. And so it was like I got nothing. I was like,
Makes so much sense.
right?
Yeah.
One of my first big breakthroughs, though, came from like struggling with that. When we started therapy, they were like, really intro stuff, like, tell me some of your, things you struggle with and tell me some of your strengths. One of the positive things about you. And I was like, I've got nothing positive. Like, they were like, nothing. I was like, no, not one thing. No, once again, I didn't have access to anything like that. And also when I use I versus we, usually it is whoever's first person memory that was. So telling stories like that, that's usually how we go.
That makes so much sense, though.
hmm So I didn't have access to any of that. And um, so later there was a memory that I did have that was traumatic from our childhood. And they said, well, if you could go back into your memory, what would you tell that little girl? So I had the memory, but it was a third person memory. I didn't, in the memory, like, I could definitely be separate from her and be like, I know what I could tell a little girl in this memory. So I sat down after therapy and wrote a letter to that little girl who, once again, I didn't have a connection to. And because I didn't have a connection to, I think it was easier to be outside of that experience. The memory I held was traumatic, but it was like watching something, like watching an action movie where you're like, oh, wow, that's a lot. It wasn't a first person experience. So
Yeah.
I could, from an outsider, go, oh my gosh, this should have never happened to you. And this was like some of the first bridges that we made with each other.
That makes so much sense. Especially the when you have that almost like factual and
Mhm.
visual, but no connection to,
Exactly.
right? And it's really challenging to do the healing work if you're the part with like the factual information and the healing too, but it's confusing, I think, for the therapist because I can see in like, just even my own training, forget about lived experience for a moment. Like, you're trained to just say, oh, they just associated the feelings. And so we just need to do the reconnection with the body part, but not recognizing that there's a whole other like sort of individual within that
Yes.
houses the entirety of the experience somewhere.
Right. And then there's no amount of how do you feel about that? Because there's no feeling about it. Because it's not
Yeah.
a personal, it didn't happen to this me.
I can also see, I don't know if this was your experience, but I can see where clinicians would easily conflate the idea of exiles with different parts who are trauma
Hmm.
holders in the system,
Yes,
not recognizing that some of those trauma holders have multiple roles within the system.
very much so.
So it's not like they're in exile. They might, sort of manage many aspects of daily life and still be a trauma holder. I think there is this default to trying to oversimplify systems and categorize parts into these one-dimensional descriptors when that doesn't really fit the lived experience.
Yes, like, and especially as systems get more connected, I find that alters become more well-rounded. It's not this is my role, but as like maybe in the very beginning, but as there's more connection, that alter can become more like three-dimensional. They learn what they like and what they don't like outside of this role that they had to do for survival. Like, and I think that's really healthy.
Yeah. I'm thinking about how much that actually adds to the richness of life
Hmm.
and the experience in the world, right? Gosh, there's this default to sometimes for people to suggest that, when you're first discovering parts or you kind of have a sense that there's somebody out there,
Yes.
but you're not fully connected yet. So there's like, okay, there's a hidden part or a stowaway that is about to make an appearance here. It's funny to me how the default sometimes is to suggest that they are but fragments and will never be any more. Nobody saw the air quotes that I just did, but and they'll
Yeah.
never somehow be more than that when that's been suggested to me, I've heard very distinct internal feedback that's like, nope, that is not just a
Hmm.
fragment. So being open to and curious about what the experience is of the system in front of you is really important, regardless of the modality you're attempting to use.
Yes, very much so.
How did you guys, well, before I move on to the how did you guys figure out that you needed to not be using IFS to find something different? Were there things about IFS that felt really beneficial while you were exploring it?
Absolutely. So, in exploring it, both me and Jonathan, the hubs, were able to get this framework for listening to parts of self and not like disregarding that. And so when I heard my first alter talking to me in the headspace, and I told him, like, there's this angry teenage voice yelling at me. He wasn't off put because IFS gave him a framework for understanding that. And so he was like, well, did you ask her why she's mad? Because this is like what you would do with IFS. And I was terrified because like there's a voice in my head yelling and I was like, no, I'm not trying to encourage her. But he was able to be grounded and encourage me, no, like talk to her, ask her. And so she liked him right off. Like he had points immediately.
I am
Um,
validated.
yes. And so it gave him a sense of safety in what I was dealing with. So he wasn't freaked out. And him being cool with it allowed like me to be like, okay, okay, I can navigate this. I can deal with this instead of just completely shutting down. So that was really helpful.
That's beautiful. I'm curious, I'm just begging the question for me. Do you feel like that framework or the sort of making parts of self be okay as a concept, did that give your alters, I don't know how I want to frame this, like permission to front more obviously? What's the word I'm looking for? Wow, my brain just suddenly shut down in terms of vocabulary here.
No, I'm tracking with you. Like it did that, was that what gave them permission to be more overt with me? Yeah.
Thank you.
Um, I think really what did it was so we were learning how to tolerate emotions in the present. And when our high trigger season came up, the first time we got really dysregulated, normally we would just shut down and withdraw and not tell anybody. We would just get real quiet for a couple months until it passed. And so this
So
time,
relatable.
right, like
So relatable.
tuck internally.
I'm just gonna wait.
We just white knuckle it till this is over.
Yes.
Um, and instead of doing that, we stayed with our body and with the emotion. And having never done that, the first time you do it, it feels like it's going to drown you, that it's going to kill you. You're like, you're not going to be able to get through this. It's so intense. And so we called Jonathan. We're like, just so you know, because always I would hide it. Just so you know, I'm having one of the days where I can't stop crying, and I'm just gonna try and stay with it. And so he came home from work and just sat with me while I tried to sit with the emotions and feel through it. And it took about 2 hours to get to the other side of that. And when I got to the other side of that, I had a cache of memories
Oh, wow.
just release. And so for the next hour, like I was like, oh, and I just remembered. Oh, and I just remembered. And these weren't like, I would expect them to be traumatic. Suppressed memories are traumatic, but they were those memories of me as a kid where I didn't have any reference for. It
Mm.
was me as a little girl doing that, me as a little kid doing this. And so then all of a sudden I'm all of these memories and I'm telling Jonathan, and I think that was the first barrier to come down was once I was safe enough to be with my body, with the feelings that were associated with some of the harder memories, even if I didn't actively remember them yet. It was like, okay, like she's got enough skills, we can go ahead and open the door a little.
I'm sitting here thinking about all of this, and I know it was really painful, but it sounds so beautiful at the same time.
Mhm.
It's this opening into a whole different way of being in the world and being with yourselves.
Mhm. I mean, so much so. And then from that, we gained our first ability to trust that we can get through those moments. So the next time we had one of those moments, we could say, oh, well, we got through this before. I know it'll pass. I know it feels eternal now, but I know it'll pass if I just stay with it. Um,
Yeah.
and then to know that we could share it with our spouse and that you know, he didn't have to do anything. He didn't try to do anything. He just was there and gave us his presence, which, like, I call it sacred witnessing. I think pain needs a sacred witness. And when we have dissociative disorders, a large part of us couldn't witness it. So much of us had to look away. And so our first connection is being our own sacred witness. But as a social species, I think we need other people to witness with us. They don't have to do anything, they just have to be there and watch the darkness with us.
One of the most moving pieces of the last episode that we did together was being able to witness Jonathan's unbelievable devotion and complete unconditional love for every single member of your system.
Hmm.
And I remember thinking, I think I may have even said it, like, you guys are relationship goals. And Jonathan sometimes feels like a unicorn that way because he seems to have this incredible intuitive ability to do what you need in
Hmm.
such a loving way.
Yeah. I've called him a unicorn, but he's a very caring, empathetic person, and he's social. So he likes people. He enjoys getting to know them. So when there was more of me, he was like, "Oh, okay, let's get to know them. Let's see who they are and what they like." And because he's empathetic, like he really pays attention to the emotional sort of needs going on.
What an incredible partner to be with to go through this whole process. It's really
Mhm.
a lifelong journey, right? Like we're
Yes.
constantly transforming and healing and changing, but he's really incredible. I have a secret wish, that he will decide to start training other supporters in
I
how
would love
to
that.
do this and how to have, I
Right.
think so many people who are either friends or partners, spouses, even parents of people who have DID and OSDD are so lost. And
Hmm. Yeah.
he would be great at it. So I put a plug in for, a second career for Jonathan.
I am so down. Like it just came naturally to him out of the overflow of who he is.
He's so personable too. He's one of those people you could just
Yes.
listen to all day.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
two are really well matched in that way.
Thank you.
How did you guys decide to sort of move on, like just abandon the IFS ship to sort of be like, okay, we've gotten some benefits, but there's definitely a struggle going on here.
So when I went to my therapist and was like, "So I'm hearing this voice," that was when we did a pivot on our treatment, because now it's not, oh, we're dealing with someone who's got maybe some complex trauma, till we're dealing with someone who has complex trauma and like complex dissociation in parts, um and I think it was shortly after that that they gave me the DES to like check dissociation, and which like I don't even know when they gave me the DES, if I knew what it was for. I was just like, yeah, yeah, cool, we'll do this. My therapist at that point, she did not say directly, but I'm fairly certain that I was her first multiple. And so she went and got mentors and like contacted all kinds of people to learn how to better treat. And it was fantastic. So I would come in and be describing something. She'll be like, "Oh yes, my mentor in like Nevada or wherever it was like said this, and I this is a very common experience for multiples." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, good."
That's phenomenal.
Oof. Yeah.
I'm so glad she did that because I keep seeing, therapists who are working with clients and they've had this beautiful relationship and then they sort of figure out the DID or OSDD piece and they bail. They're
Yes.
like, "Oh, can't do that. I'm going to refer you to somebody who can." And
Mhm.
you can also learn. You've had a relationship with this person.
Yeah. I'm not qualified, is what a lot of people say. My therapist told me they weren't qualified to treat me after the DID. And there's CE, you get qualified. Like,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
it's what consultation, supervision, trainings are
Hmm.
for. You need to do that to maintain your license anyway.
Exactly.
And if you have a relationship with this person, I think relationally, we also have an ethical, it's not just the ethical obligation, right? I would really hope that every provider who is treating clients really does have that unconditional positive regard. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a code word for love, because if you bring the L word into therapy,
Right.
people freak out. So it's like, sort of love with boundaries.
Yes. Well, and if and they find out that their client has DID because an alter trusted them enough to front with them,
Yeah.
definitely don't bail on them if you can learn and gain these skills, because it is so hard for alters to make that initial
Yes.
movement of trust with somebody. Um,
I
yeah.
mean, at the very least, right? You're a licensed therapist to be doing this practice. So you have therapeutic skill sets, some modalities, and you know
Mhm.
how to do it with individuals. You can, in the meantime, you can at least plug those in for each
Yes.
alter that you meet, right? You're not
Exactly.
going to do harm that way.
Hmm.
But I do think we do harm when we abandon people
Yes. And I've had friends.
or when we shame alters for fronting.
Yes. Oh, see, these are stories I've heard a lot in the community. Uh, One of my dear friends ended up switching therapists after this. So their therapist had told them they had DID. They were being treated for a year with this therapist, and they kept saying, "Well, my therapist doesn't want to hear. They only want to treat me. They don't want any of my alters to front in therapy." And I'm like these people need to have their own healing experience. Like if you don't let them front and you don't give them access to the person who has the tools for their own healing experience, like how's that going to work?
Mhm. I think sometimes there are clinicians who will also overthink some of the stuff, right? So they only want to treat one person and then
Mhm.
they'll maybe consider like, okay, it makes sense to me that I would need to meet parts and that it is an honor to meet parts. It does mean that they started to trust me. Invariably, someone will then say, "Oh my God, well, what do you do for large systems like that? I can't meet 1,000 parts or 100 parts. Like
Mhm.
that's not feasible." And it's sort of like, but you can also have spokes parts for groups of people, that
Yeah.
it's sometimes it's just think it through. Don't panic.
Yes, yes, don't panic. Work with, like, you already know how not to do harm. And so with systems, like, it's very easy to not do harm if you're treating them individually with the issues they bring up.
Yes.
So if a child part fronts and they're scared, then you know how to treat a child that's scared. You treat a
Hmm.
child that's scared. Um,
Yeah.
But so my therapist was very much working on kind of that basis. Whoever was fronting when we had therapy time was the one who got to go to therapy. And she was very much of the learning mindset and very good at curiosity. And as we began to communicate better and get more connectivity with each other, which I think is so you got the safety and stability phase. And then with systems, once you got safety and stability, you're really looking for connection, communication, because you can't have the functional multiplicity without the connection and communication. So we were working on connecting, on communicating, learning who each other was. For those of us who didn't like others of us, like learning how to get along, because you, one of them was like, I cannot share the body with this. And well, I'm sorry, we're kind of all stuck in here together. So, like, our therapist had to literally mediate between a couple warring factions, and which she was very good at. And once we had reached that kind of connection and communication, and we were on mostly good terms with each other, we decided, okay, we would like to try some of these trauma processing techniques. Like we've got enough coping mechanisms between all of us. Like each of us had gained some comfort with the therapeutic process, that we're like, okay, we can do that. And my therapist was trained in EMDR, so we started EMDR with her. And I will say, so I don't remember how long we had EMDR with her. Um, Maybe a year before her practice, she was moving. And so we had to find another therapist. And we were able
Oh,
to find someone who um, had a focus on DID and had done EMDR training for multiples. And the difference in quality was very noticeable. Um, a lot of multiples have had harm done with EMDR. So it's not necessarily a modality that I recommend lightly for multiples. I'm like, are y'all solid? Like, are y'all solid? And then does your therapist know what they're doing? Because it's different with multiples. There are some safeguards you can put in place when you're doing MDR with a system so that some of the more vulnerable parts have like some buffers to what's being processed. But for us, we found that for EMDR to be most effective, each of us had to do that specific memory with EMDR. For each one that had access to it, they had to. So we had a traumatic memory that one of us held the audio memory, the audible
mhm.
memory. One of us held the body memory. Another of us had the emotional memory. And each one of them had to process that memory through EMDR for it to bring down the um, I don't know how I say that, like the traumatic nature of the memory.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And we had really good results. Um, EMDR is extremely difficult. A lot of times after sessions, we would just sit in our car for an hour to like kind of like, okay, we're good, we're safe, we're here before driving home. Sometimes I called it getting in the weeds. Sometimes we get in the weeds and I'd have to call Jonathan and be like, I need you to come get me. And then nothing the rest of the day. Like I'm not, I'm not okay. Um,
Yeah.
so like it is effective, it's powerful, it is difficult, and difficult for a system.
Yeah. It's so complicated. We were lucky enough to get trained by Jamie Marich, who
Mm.
has a really clear focus, right, on how you can effectively do EMDR with folks who have DID and OSDD, which was really helpful. And as part of your training, right, you are practicing being a facilitator and you're also practicing being the client. And we experienced firsthand the challenges of being a system and trying to, receive EMDR. We're really lucky because Jamie also has a lot of people who are facilitators that are,
Mm.
consultants that help. And are really great with systems. So that was a helpful thing, but it really gave me the bird's eye view of the power, but also the defenses in the system itself.
Yes. Yes.
So wholeheartedly support the recommendation of, you know, be careful and make sure that you really are solid before you go into it. And
Mhm.
I think you are somebody who's really good at helping people understand that just because you struggle after a session and it's hard, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to throw that out.
Oh, absolutely not. Like I said, the quality of life gains we got were really impressive. It was enough to be like, okay, we're going to go back in and do some more.
That's encouraging. So for, you know, for people listening, there are people that you think you go through, you experiment with modality and you have a reaction to it. Sometimes you have somatic reactions to it,
Mhm.
emotional reactions to it, and you're like, oh my God, I feel like I'm so much worse today than I was before I went to therapy. But that stuff hasn't had a chance to integrate either,
Exactly.
right? And sometimes we do have to do exactly what you talked about earlier, right? Of just staying with it. The go-to sometimes is to just cut it off. Like we're so used to dissociating, right? I need this to go away.
Yes. Yep, that's it. Yes. My current therapist, she's the one who had done EMDR for multiples. She got trained in something called deep brain reorienting, and she was like, would you be interested? I hear that this is going to be perhaps a better technique for multiples because it works on the level below parts. It hits like under conscious levels and is very somatic. And I was like, okay. Well, I was like, you're not going to break me. Like at this point, I've already done I've done like 2 years of EMDR. Like let's give that a try. And I will say as well, so now um we started when she had her first like level certificate, and now she's gone through, I think, 3 levels and is working on, I think, like the specialist level.
Wow.
And once again, the quality and the difference is impressive. So it was great at the first level, and now it's mind-blowing.
Wow. For people who don't have any idea like what the heck it is,
Yes.
can you describe like what it is and then your experiences with it?
Absolutely. So deep brain orienting is, I usually don't use the acronym DBR because people will confuse it with DBT, dialectical
Oh,
behavioral therapy, which it's not anywhere close to that. It's a somatic trauma processing technique or modality. And so what the therapist does, where with EMDR, you have to like make a container and have all these things, what DBR does is first it helps to orient you in your present moment and in your body. So once again, why being able to tolerate being in your body in the present is the important first step before you go any farther in treatment. So you orient into your present moment, into your body, and then um, rather than bring up the traumatic memory. So, and we have found you don't actually have to actively remember the memory. If I come in and say I got triggered, she goes, okay, what was the moment you first felt that in your body? So you go to that moment in the memory. So not necessarily the memory, but the first moment where you go, ooh, I don't think I think something's wrong. You know, the spidey senses
yeah.
are tingling. You then let your body, as you bring up that moment, she asks you to feel in your body where the tension is because we've already oriented in our body, we're relaxed, and without fail, there will be what she calls an orienting tension, where your body experiences like the moment of shock before the overwhelming thing hits. And then sometimes memories come up, sometimes whatever, but the you don't stay with any kind of memory, you stay with your body. So you have the initial orienting tension. And so for me, I'll report. I find that saying what I'm experiencing in my body sometimes helps it move. A lot of times it's like a lot of tension and then it moves into pain, like here or there. As I've gotten better at leaning into letting my body do whatever and not been so stiff of, oh, it's going to look weird. Like there's lots of like jolts, lots of pins and needles that'll happen as the body is clearing the shock out of the system. And then once the body clears the shock, which can take sessions sometimes, just sessions of your body reconnecting to itself from this shocking experience, then oftentimes there's an emotional affect that comes in. So depending on the emotional affect can be like grief or anger or whatever, but it's not like it's a lot more transient than one than EMDR or two than when I would be triggered. It's my body's cleared the shock and then been able to move from like a freeze to fight or flight and the emotions that are associated with it. And it's been my experience that once I move through the emotional affect, that there's this profound sense of release, of relaxation, of like of aha moments. I get a lot of in the following days, a lot of aha moments come in. Um,
Oh,
and it's been so life-changing. It's definitely been easier than EMDR. She's right, it's below. Like I don't have to actively remember what we're processing for the processing to be effective, and then for that thing to lose its intensity as a trigger. It's just been phenomenal.
that sounds so incredibly powerful on so many different levels.
Hmm.
And it's making me wonder too how many people who are able to do it and go through it, who have access to it, I wonder how many of their physical ailments clear up afterwards.
Oh, and okay. So the first session we do with the DBR, like this is her first session with me, mine first with her. I'm trying this new thing. And so I have Ehlers-Danlos, I have loose joints, and I noticed that the next 2 weeks I just could not get my shoulder back in place. It hurt me those whole 2 weeks. And then we start back up the next therapy session and we get my body into the present and relaxed. And she was like, okay, pull up that memory. And it was all this like right there. So instantly. And then once we processed all the way through it, like I was thinking I was going to have to go to the chiropractor. No, once we had processed through it, like it released and I've had a lot less after that specific target. Like it took the first target, we picked a good one. It took me quite a few weeks, but once we cleared that one, the amount of neck and shoulder pain that I have is significantly less.
That sounds just incredible. I'm thinking about all these different things that you can get a benefit from on the, once you go through it on the other side of it,
Mhm.
between potentially chronic illnesses, autoimmune diseases, improving your emotional state being better. And when you ever said, like, I have this feeling of, kind of relaxation, my entire nervous system would like to experience that. Like, my vagus nerve is like,
It's so profound. Like if you've ever had a really long, like an hour-long massage and you feel noodly afterwards, it's that noodly, like you just feel
oh.
so like, whew, but not in a stress, like I'm wrung out, but just in a profoundly relaxed way.
It just sounds like it's like literally releasing the actual blockages in every level of your conscious being, like whether that's your physical body, your emotional body, your mental body. It sounds like the dams are opening so that you've got flow.
Yes. And one of the things that my therapist and I were talking about, like as she was getting higher certifications and as we were noticing my journey with DBR and the effects that it has, she was like, I used to think that, the body held the trauma when the trigger activated it. But now I'm thinking that it's always being passively held there. And
Yeah.
as we're doing this treatment, it's releasing each one that it's been holding on to, like literally my whole life. And I was like, that's exactly how it feels. Like each time we get through one of these large ones, I'm literally lighter. And then like when I encounter those things, it's definitely a lot more. It's like, oh, that's sad. Like I can be like, that's sad, that shouldn't have happened, but I'm not having this huge reaction.
Yeah. It doesn't own you anymore, it sounds like.
Yes, yes.
It sounds so amazing.
It's like I cannot sing its praises enough. And as a multiple, having experienced both techniques, going, this one's so much easier, like by comparison. Not to say that it's easy, but like each of us didn't have to process. None of us had to actively remember something that was terrible.
Oh,
We just had to stay with our body. And sometimes that's really tough. One of the hardest ones that I cleared, when I like it took a lot to clear all of the shock, and I kept feeling this squeezing in my my diaphragm. And then as this final burst is like clearing, I was literally like, it felt like I was like the motions of throwing up, but I wasn't nauseous, but it was just this ugh, like something is coming out. And so with this coughing and this like squeezing, and then like just heat radiating all through me,
wow.
like this thing that's just been stuck there. And after that, it felt like I could take a deeper breath than I'd ever had. Like I'd just been holding this thing in my stomach, and now I could breathe deeply into myself. I didn't have to squeeze myself down and squeeze my feelings down and my voice down. And it was just like it was transformative.
It sounds so incredible. Here's a
Mhm.
question. Well, I've got two questions for you about this.
Yeah.
One is you had mentioned that in order to do this, you don't actually have to go through the memory of it. You don't have to remember what it's about. So I have a feeling people listening are going to be asking inside their own heads, like, how do you pick the target? You don't have to know the memory.
Yeah. And so unlike with EMDR, a lot of times they want you to go, okay, where's the base? Where's the lowest you can go with this issue? So they want you to find the foundation of what started this. With this, so there's some things that I knew, like big T trauma moment here, big T trauma moment here, and it's still affecting me. But like one of the issues we had right after fusion was we had a lot of functional gains by being together, but one of our losses was in the grocery store because there were only a couple of us that didn't get dissociative and anxiety in the grocery store. And so now that all of us are bringing our skills to bear, like the grocery store became overwhelming. And
Mm.
so I go in and I'm like, the grocery store is overwhelming. Can we target this? Like, I don't know why it's overwhelming. But I need to be able to shop. And so she was like, okay, at what moment do you feel it in your body? And I'm like, sliding doors open, and that's where I feel it. And she was like, okay, we'll use that as our target. So we start with, the doors open, where do you feel it in your body? And as we processed, like sometimes I'll get images, sometimes I don't, but like flashes of images taking me like little shutters down this journey of here's where I said this is my issue, down through things that till I'm little and I'm in a store and I'm hungry and we didn't have the money for the thing and the shame that I felt. And so there were a whole bunch of things that reinforced that, but I didn't have to get to that spot. I just had to go, this is where I'm at. And we're like, okay. And sometimes there's none of those images. Sometimes it's just the release and the
Wow.
body doing it. But it was like, oh, that's why. Not only was it this tiny little person who wants a snack and no, we can't afford that. But then as I grew, all these things that reinforced that this is a difficult place and that food is hard and not having money is shameful. And so, yeah, just bringing in I don't know why grocery shopping is hard, but I need it to not be hard so I can take care of my family.
Wow.
And we were able to process that.
You know, one of the things I really love about this is it literally, I mean, I know it's like underneath memories, but you literally are trusting and at the same time leveraging the wisdom of the physical body and also the wisdom of your system,
Yes.
right? Because
Yes.
like what you just described around here's a sensation, here's this thing that happens to me in present day when I go to the grocery store. And I don't know why, but it's what happens to me. And I mean, I can conceptualize that as I have parts that used to do this and now we're all together and what a cluster this is in my life. Let's fix it.
Right.
And your therapist's ability to help you figure out where that started with the physical, like that somatic reaction in your body. And then you're describing both this, your body going through the physical relief, but it also sounds like I can see places where your parts were also handing you these images of this is what I went through. This is what I went through. This is how I felt. This is how I felt. And it's all getting finally opened up and released so that you can, and you said it yourself, like I can breathe. I can take a really deep breath now. And wow. Here's another question though. So, because I feel like in listening to this, so many people are like, let me run out and do this.
Right.
Why, like, why wouldn't you want to, right? Because your life is going to improve remarkably.
Yes.
What prep work do people need to do if you're a system? Because I mean, I sort of feel like we had talked about that stabilization and safety and communication and who the heck is even in my system and like what, but in your estimation, I mean, I know everyone's different. Every system is unique. Like what works for one doesn't work for another. And all that's all true. However, we all have similarities. What would you say bare minimum somebody would need to do as a system to really be ready to do this kind of work?
Yeah, I think a lot of systems have that really productive part that's like, oh, we're going to do this and achieve healing and right. And you definitely don't want to just barrel into trauma processing of any kind, even of a easier kind for a multiple. Um, Always step one is to be able to be in your body and in your moment and tolerate your emotional and physical feelings, which is so hard. Like when you've had trauma in your body, being connected to your body feels fundamentally unsafe. Um, like I said, it took me a year to get the basics of that. And then we just continued building on it. Like, because a lot of alters then had to do the process. Like Jenna, the host, got that. And then each alter, some of them were okay being embodied, and others had a lot of trouble being able to be in touch with our body. So the safety and stability is key. Can you be present in your moment with your body? Do you trust that you can get through a difficult emotion and be to the other side of it? If you're not there yet, then this is going to feel so unsafe because you're coming into your body and letting it feel difficult things. And then you're going to have the difficult emotions come up. And can you trust that I'm safe and I'll get to the other side? And if not, then definitely continue working on that. Um, and then I would say with all systems, I think it's fundamental to communicate, to connect, to listen to each other. I like to tell them, I'm like, you don't have to agree with what the altar is saying, but you have to hear them and understand why they feel the way they do. Like, um, and JA was extremely anti Jonathan because she was extremely anti men. And like, so Jenna didn't agree with her, but to listen to her. So then when she's making choices, she's taking into account JA, even if, well, we're not leaving our husband is the choice, but to know, but Jay is going to be more comfortable in this kind of a situation, or she's going to be uncomfortable if we do these sorts of things, because she actually listened to the why and cared about, even if there were like disagreements, even if you don't like them, to care about them enough to include them. So I think that that is really fundamental in a system being healthy, which for us was our goal. We just wanted to be healthy, whatever it looked like. And I think that that's a really good goal. So if you're pursuing health and connection with each other, if you're good with, general safety and stability, then it might be a good time to look at trauma processing.
That is such good guidance. It's also really beneficial for clinicians that are listening because sometimes when somebody offers what sounds like a solution, it's
Mhm.
easy to say, oh, here it is. Here's the thing that will take this or these clients who are suffering so much and get them out of that the fastest, which seems like a kind and benevolent thing to do. But when you bypass those nuts and bolts, it's important that you know who you all are,
Yes.
right? And working on those internal relationships so that you have love and respect and compassion within the system itself so that you can make those decisions that are best for everyone. You articulated that so beautifully. Like when you said, like, when I'm making decisions and I'm talking with Jonathan and we can't do it this way because it's not good for JA, that is such a beautiful articulation of system responsibility, system
Yeah.
accountability. Right? Because if you're a part of a system, and I think this is important for clinicians and for people with lived experience, right? If you're making a decision because you want to do it, like you're the part that's fronting and you're forward, right? So, like, I use myself as an example. If I make a decision to do something because I really, really want it, and I'm not thinking about how this is going to impact the other people in my system, it may be something that's really not great. And I will then, along with everyone else in the system, suffer the consequences of that when the triggered alter or the angry alter acts out.
Exactly.
And then I think the reaction of clinicians and for people with lived experience, like we get angry with the angry alter, right? Like you shouldn't act out that way. So that alter gets pigeonholed when really it was the one that needs to be accountable is the one that went rogue and made the decision without thinking about the benefit of everybody in the system or consulting with the system.
Yes. I don't remember what I was listening to, but they were talking about the people who are most effective in life and do these great achievements have a habit of looking after like tomorrow them, future them. So they don't make decisions for today person, they make decisions for where they want to be in the future. And I thought that's exactly what we learned as a system because I might not be fronting for tomorrow. So I need to make decisions that tomorrow me, it's going to make their life easier and better. And yes, I want to be able to live my life, but if it's Lil out and she wants sweets, then she's got to make the decision not to have the dairy because she's not going to feel the pain from the dairy. Whoever's out later is going to feel it, and she'll be like, "You get to hurt." No, like, no, I'm like, yes, she wants something sweet and yummy, but she's going to choose something that's not going to hurt whoever is in front tomorrow.
That is so well said. When you think about the level of responsibility that you need to have as a system mate, that you really
Mhm.
are working as a team. So don't set your teammates up for failure.
Yes. Yes.
We had the folks listening didn't have the benefit. You and I had a brief conversation about the DES earlier on. And I remember saying like, oh, I think this would be really beneficial for people to know. And do you remember what you said about, I wish that the DES.
Yes. So I really wish we were talking about, clinicians not clocking dissociation, OSDD, DID. And I was like, I really wish anytime they knew that there was trauma in play at all, that they would just administer the DES because it's short, it's quick. And then if they scored high on that, then you might want to go to something more extensive like the mid, or I think it's the C. diff, not C. diff.
Good D.
See, yes, that one. So like because the DES is so quick and simple, it can easily let you know whether you're needing to be treating something other than like, oh, we have some trauma, some PTSD. If they score high on that, then these other things will let them know what they're looking at. Because people have often been like, well, it's really hard to tell like BPD from OSDD or DID. And yeah, it's complex, but these tests break that down and let you know what you're more likely dealing with. So
Yeah.
like the clinician doesn't have to guess. I just wish it was a lot more standard practice to just be like, here, why don't we just do this little assessment? It's going to take 5, 10 minutes,
Yep.
you know? Yeah.
And the wisdom of giving that more than once, right? Because
Yes.
who's fronting?
Yes. Yeah. And I know personally my scores changed dramatically. So regardless, they definitely indicated that there was dissociation, but there
Yep.
was a big difference in those scores.
Yeah, I think one of the things that people who are not really used to working with multiples often, it's easy to give something like the DES, which is a screening tool, and you might look at it and see, oh, yeah, this makes sense. So my client scored in the range that is typically what folks with PTSD would score. That
Mhm.
checks out because the person has PTSD and then they never give it again. But you don't know for sure if the person, if the alter that was taking, who's present in that moment, that was taking the DES in that moment, was inside thinking, I have to be really careful. Like, I can't let the cat out of the bag. So I'm going to be really careful in how I answer these questions. I absolutely have that part, right? I mean, I have a
Yeah.
part that will outright lie on,
Yeah.
no, we don't hear any internal voice. Like, it depends on
Mm-hmm.
who's present, but then you get another part that might be present who will answer that very differently. And so what you saw originally as, oh, this checks out with PTSD might end up being like a 52 and is right in line with a relatively high DID score, you know?
Yes. Yes.
And I mean, that said, right, you can also get alters who are desperate to be seen and recognized. So they overshoot. And then you get an outrageously high score that also isn't indicative of what's really going on. So I think there's a lot of wisdom in administering it more than once and just using your good clinical judgment. Pay attention to what you're looking at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think a lot of times people who are wanting to be like logical and approach things from a logical direction discount their intuition.
Yes.
Like if you're like, they're feeling a little different. I mean, maybe now you'd be like, hey, why don't you take this again? We're just
Yeah.
really don't discount that intuition because a lot of times there's an energy shift with switches and alters.
Yes. And that's not a bad thing. It's something
Hmm.
that is indicative. Oh, it just reminded me of another point that we had just briefly dipped into, and it's not a long conversation by any means, but it is when you start getting more cooperation, and not even cooperation, when you know who's in your system and you have some communication and there is more sort of processing going on in therapy, as a clinician, the client that you're looking at might appear to be worse.
Yes.
It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It means the person is actually less dissociative. Some of the barriers are coming down, so it's actually a good thing.
Exactly, exactly right. And what I've told a lot of people who are like, well, since I discovered I have DID, like it seems like it's so much more. And I'm like, that's actually because alters are feeling more comfortable to front, more comfortable to be themselves. And then I have to give them the advice that no host wants to hear, which is you should let them. You should let them front. You should let them be themselves. And I had somebody online like say, because I have several videos where we're just like being like, hi, I'm so and so, and hi, I'm so and so, like the
Mhm.
alters just being themselves. And they're being like, well, that's increasing fragmentation. No, no, it's increasing trust that they're allowed to be who they are. And then it allows us to get to know each other better and cooperate and connect better. Like we started making the most gains when Jenna quit resisting. Like everyone has to mask, everybody has to like act like the host, unified front, and was like, hey, if it's safe for you to front and be yourself, you can front and be yourself. Like not if we're at a parent-teacher conference, okay, let's put on a unified front, but if it's
That's so
safe to
fair.
be you, right? And that was when we started making gains. That's when we started trusting better, communicating better, working together better. And especially as the hosts who really like control, to hand over the reins and then see, oh wow, they didn't mess everything up. And oh wow, the little went grocery shopping and actually did a great job. I'm super grateful for the snacks. Like,
Yeah. There's so much that goes into parts being able to front openly, even in like the sort of sacred, safe enough space of therapy. Because I think for many people, there's shame involved.
mhm.
So, well, all right, this is what I hear, right? So shame involved in I feel embarrassed about how X part might behave or how they
Yes.
might talk. But then on the flip side, you'll have other systems who can let their parts front, but those parts they sound the same anyway. They're just
Yes.
reporting different internal experiences. So you're not always getting vocal differences or massively changed
Hmm.
mannerisms in an individual. So you really have to trust, if you're the clinician, you really have to trust what your clients are saying and believe their experiences.
Yes. Yes.
So, right, if Sue walks into session and halfway through you find out that you're really talking to Steve, but they look and sound the same to you, that's fine, but you're still talking to Steve.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. I love one of the things I love online for is building community, and I've been able to build community with systems who have very dramatically different presentations, alter to alter, and then systems that there's no voice change, there's no posture change. But for me, it's really based on the subject that the way they handle, different conversations. I know who's out, but like a normal person wouldn't clock that at all because you're not like seeing any dramatic anything.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that people can say, yes, this is DID, but this is also DID.
Yes.
And the brain did what it needed to do in each of those situations, which is why the presentation is different and unique.
That is such a beautiful way of putting that. I think this conversation is going to help a lot of people.
Oh, I hope so.
I really do. I mean, from people with lived experience who are just struggling with what they're doing and where do I go next and what's available to me and how can I talk to my therapist and maybe even encourage my therapist to seek some consultation. Like, don't be afraid of me. Like, just check with somebody else who treats this regularly. I value our relationship.
Absolutely.
To also being, the system mate who says, I want to front end therapy this week. Let me,
Mm. Yeah.
and working that out. Ah, thank you so much. I swear I could talk to you all day long.
It's so enjoyable.
And I know so
Like,
many people could listen to you all day long too. So you'll have to come back again.
oh, absolutely. Thank you for having me on. I really enjoy it.
Thank you so much. To everyone listening, thank you so much for being here. We really hope you enjoyed this conversation. And whether you're a system or provider of systems, we hope you got some really great takeaways that you can use to help healing flow forward. If you know anyone who might benefit from this episode, please feel free to share it and keep an eye on our Instagram and Substack for more support and healing for both systems and providers. Again, thank you all so much for listening. And until next time, let's keep healing. Thank you for tuning in. You can find our blog on Substack at healingmyparts.substack.com and on Instagram at healingmyparts. Just a disclaimer, any information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for professional therapy or behavioral health care. Nor does listening to the podcast constitute a therapist-client relationship. Please be sure to take extra good care of you. And until next time, keep healing and thriving.